We see, poets, priests, and politicians. Yeah, priests. I mean, you see a lot of people who are in religious environments, gurus, things like this. Um, so that's why it's so important to understand, I think, that the monster, the monsters around you do not look like what you think a monster will look like. They look like your, neighbor Joe, and they look like.
Hi, this is Dr. Andrew Rimby, host of the Ivory Tower Boiler Room Arts and Culture podcast. If you haven't, please take a second to rate us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Please make sure you're following us on Spotify or Apple. And did you know we have a YouTube channel? Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. It really means a lot. You can actually see a lot of our video episodes on YouTube. And if you don't want to listen to any ads that are going to happen throughout the episode, even though I love all of our sponsors, of course, you can listen to our ad-free episodes on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room. And right now, you can get 1 week for free to see all of the ad-free episodes. And all of those episodes are also video episodes. So you can get to watch me, the guest, and you can also listen to all of Mary's True Crime and Academia episodes ad-free. Okay, I hope you enjoyed the episode. Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Andrew Rimby, and I'm so pleased to be joined for all things Valentine's season with Vanessa M. Reiser, who is a licensed clinical social worker. She is licensed in New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Florida. She is a psychotherapist and the founder of Teletherapist LLC, as well as the founder of the nonprofit Teletherapist Incorporated. She holds a bachelor's degree in political science from SUNY Empire State, a Master of Social Work from the University of Southern California. She specializes in narcissistic personality disorder, and her practice focuses on treating victims and survivors of cults, narcissists, domestic violence, and narcissistic abuse. And she is also well known for being a long distance runner and two-time Ironman, who is best known for running the state of New York, which is 285 miles in 11 days, in a wedding dress to raise awareness for narcissistic abuse. And she's here to talk all things her new book, Narcissistic Abuse, A Therapist's Guide to Identifying, Escaping, and Healing from Toxic and Manipulative People. Okay, I hope I did justice to all things Vanessa M. Reiser. Hi, Vanessa.
Hi, thank you so much. I know it's a lot, but I appreciate that bio.
Well, it's incredible, all the work that you do and all the help that you provide. So, I guess first things first, for those who don't know of you, like I know you, Vanessa and I, talk frequently. What really just inspired maybe even the journey of you becoming a social worker?
Sure, I had a lot of adversity in my childhood, so there were days where maybe there wasn't a lot of food or even heat. We were sort of these like ragamuffin Irish kids growing up in New York. And as I got older and I saw some of the injustices that were going on around me in different environments and feeling in some ways, even though I am privileged as a white person, feeling a little bit disenfranchised, feeling a little like the class system wasn't really benefiting me. I always felt bad for the underdog, for the little guy. And I remember wanting to get into politics, and that's why the poli sci undergrad came to be. And then I met with somebody who I was asking for a referral for a master's program, and she was actually very rude. And she ended up asking me a bunch of questions. And I said, I want to go into politics. And she said, well, if you go into politics, then you'll have to be buttoned up. You can't sort of rage around issues. You have to be like a talking head. And I thought, well, that's not going to be me. I want to advocate. I want to be a big mouth. I want to, like, kick down doors. And so she's like, you should be a social worker. And so, as much as we were sort of not getting along in the beginning of the conversation, she ended up giving me this information that actually changed my life.
Hmm.
And so, I went to the University of Southern California and studied community organizing and social policy, which is a very macro approach, not planning on being a therapist. And then decided I needed to pay my bills because that wasn't going to be making me any money. And I became a therapist. And I love both legs of social work that I practice, which are that sort of macro approach and advocacy, as well as the clinical components. I just love everything about what I do. It's as if I were built for this.
Well, listening to your Audible book of narcissistic abuse, which Vanessa, I just love the way like your voice comes through in every chapter, and it's so nice that you read your book. Um, so with hearing your discussion about like I know you touch upon your childhood, like you've discussed here, but when it came to specializing in narcissistic abuse, a question I always have been, meaning to ask you, which this is the great chance to do it, is did you becoming interested in narcissistic abuse connect with you experiencing narcissistic abuse, or were you kind of already interested in that field of study?
No, I was working at the Jewish Board in the Bronx, which is an outpatient mental health clinic, very triage style, kind of foster care system, lots of trauma, very much like an inner city experience. We saw everything there, gangbangers and schizophrenics and everything, that you could ever imagine. And then also the Bronx High School of Science I worked at, which was a satellite program of the Jewish Board, which is an institution that puts out more Nobel Peace Prize winning humans than most institutions, which is really exciting. Lots of immigrant population at the Bronx High School of Science. You have to test in, you cannot buy your way in there. And then similarly, Lehman College has a satellite school called the High School of American Studies. So I was also working there. And I kind of fancied myself at the time somebody who was like the cool social worker, like the kids liked me, and I was like down with like teens, and that was kind of like my thing. Um, and then I did have a relationship that transformed my entire life. And that's sort of what prompted me to really, really study something that they weren't teaching me much about at master's program. And I kind of um, began to this whole other journey around mind control and manipulative people. And that's how I got into that line of work.
When did you, in your relationship, what was one of the early warning signs of, because like you explain, if you're experiencing narcissistic abuse, you're gaslit so heavily that in like you just question everything. You're like, no, this can't be happening to me. Maybe what my abuser is saying is right about me. Like you're made to feel so diminutive and just weakened. Like when did you realize no, what's going on is actually a problem and I know that I need to get out of this situation.
Well, it's really funny because if you Google it, it actually comes up where toxic people will begin to reveal themselves to around the 4 month marker. Um, I guess in the love bombing stages, abusers are able to keep the mask on for a certain period. And then what they do is they kind of purposefully actually let it slip so they can kind of see what you'll tolerate. Cult leaders do the same thing. They'll give you like a little bit of a peek into what you'll expect so they can see, engage. Oh, you're going to tolerate that. Now let me turn up the dial. So I think the time frame is about 4 months. And it's funny because as a single woman now, when I'm dating, if there's somebody I take a liking to, I say to myself, okay, let's just see where you're going to be in 4 months. I may even write it on my calendar. Because I'm wondering, at what point are you going to then get cozy enough to show me who you really are? And that's not to say that you might not have, the sort of honeymoon stage of a relationship and then things could just, get maybe a little stale or they're not exactly as exciting as that original phase. This is very different. This is somebody who ultimately is devaluing you, somebody who is passive aggressive or using the silent treatment.
Mm.
to sort of confuse you and control you. So it's very systematic, but I would say around 4 months.
So, because this is Valentine's season, I know you have such a conversation of like just nuanced language around love bombing and why Valentine's is, I mean, something that those who've experienced narcissistic abuse is very triggering. But like, why is Valentine's Day and everything that it represents a really like pivotal moment for the narcissist?
Well, I think that narcissists will take opportunities like that to love bomb. But at the same time, they will take opportunities like holidays and birthdays and vacations to devalue. So you may find yourself on Valentine's Day, if you're with a narcissist, getting the highest level of uplift, and then at the end of the day, getting the lowest level of devalue. So those sort of peaks and valleys are what create the trauma bond and all of the confusion around it. Because it's like, wait a minute, this morning, I was God's gift, and then you just kicked my legs out from under me. So now, how did that come to be? And you never do rationalize it. If you don't understand what exactly is going on, you will begin to become confused and you will blame yourself. Did I do something wrong? Am I the problem? This person was so loving. Obviously, I must be doing something wrong. And it's sort of this circle. That's the cycle of abuse, that kind of up and down. But yeah, Valentine's Day, like most holidays, is an opportunity for them to flex and then devalue.
Mm. So, if couples listening out there, even myself listening to your book, I was messaging Vanessa. I'm like, my boyfriend and I are listening, and we're trying to dissect all these moments. I stopped messaging Vanessa because it would have been going on and on. But eventually, like my boyfriend and I, we have our own therapists and like we like talk through a lot of issues and we're able to come back to the table and compromise or like say, okay, I take ownership for this or I needed to cool off for a few days. And like we both do an equal amount of that. It seems like from your experience and your book that that's not what the narcissist is capable of doing. Like, there's not really a lot of self awareness and reflecting and moving forward. Is
Yeah,
that
they
true?
have yeah, Dr. Peter Salerno references the narcissist as having an inability to specifically collaborate. So
Mm,
there is no collaboration. This is their way or the highway. What they're doing, if they're apologizing or pretending to be working with you, is just kind of buying time. They have
mm,
no real ability to practice conflict resolution or collaborate specifically. This is not going to be a shared effort.
mm.
They are at the helm and you better fall in line. Can they play with you and toy with you, string you along and future fake and tell you, "Oh yeah, I'm going to be collaborating. Me, I'm the greatest collaborator. I mean, collaborating is my middle name." Yeah, they'll play all of those games, but it's a bait and switch. Ultimately, you'll find out that that's a game for them.
So, kind of like, I don't know, did you see Wicked?
I haven't yet.
Okay.
Everyone's telling me that I have to see this.
Well, just because it reminds me at the beginning of Wicked, there's this question posed, um, like, where does wickedness come from? And I kind of like want to ask you, Vanessa, what is the theories out there about where narcissism comes from? Because I feel like, if I remember correctly, you offer a two-pronged theory, like with childhood trauma and, those who develop it later on in life.
There's a lot of different perspectives on this. I would say that everything in the world is going to be, for in terms of human behavior, is going to always have some recipe of nature and nurture. However, I am kind of leaning lately more into the camp of nature. I think when we first started to understand schizophrenia, we thought this was something that was from trauma, and now we now know that this is something that is biological. And similarly, I think NPD is a broken brain for the most part. And the reason why I think that is because it's very rigid, as is schizophrenia. We don't see a lot of movement other than treating it through medical management. And I see a lot of parallels actually with schizophrenic behaviors in that there's like heavy delusion, right? So the narcissist in a lot of cases actually believes the bullshit that they're telling you. There's some kind of a story that they're living in, like a fantasy world. And so based on those kinds of things, there are not a lot of studies on NPD really that you can kind of go to because narcissists aren't like, hey, study me, I'm a narcissist. So like there's a lot of data now coming out, but I tend to be recently leaning a little bit more into the camp of this is in some way either intergenerational trauma, um, some kind of a genetic piece, somehow the brain is really lacking empathy, and that scares me to the core. But a little bit more in that camp lately.
Has there ever been a case, or are there those who actually get diagnosed with NPD? So that's narcissistic personality disorder, right? For everyone out
Yes.
there. Okay. So have there been cases where someone is diagnosed with NPD and they have this like these pangs of how am I going to live with NPD? Like, has there ever been a self-reflection moment from someone with
I
NPD?
think I think there are people who have a little bit more of a benign version of this, that can have glimpses of regret or concern about their behaviors, probably because long term they understand it as not being sustainable, and they
Mm,
may lose relationships, they may lose money, they may lose their career. Um, But by and large, narcissists like the way that they are. They think that people who have empathy are losers, that people who have empathy are losing, that they are inferior, that they are wusses or something like this. And so they think they're winning. They think that it's a tallying experience, this life of theirs. So like they're one-upping everyone all the time. And so, you know, in some toxic relationships, you probably ask your partner, like, you know, or say to your partner, like, sometimes when you win, you lose. Because it's
mm,
like, congratulations, you won, you beat me to the pulp, and now you're going to be alone for the rest of your life. Like, so I think that they're so eager to win, not seeing the bigger picture, not understanding the long game of it, not understanding legacy and how to parent and be kind and why that adds value to their lives. um but they don't have empathy, or they lack empathy, and this is kind of the fundamental problem with them, really. But they don't really care, they like the way they are.
mm. Do you know the book Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt?
I don't.
Okay, so there was this book recently written. I recommend it to all my students because it's very like Gen Z identified, but it's about like how social media and just this constant scrolling is really rewiring or like creating a lot of panic. Um, and it kind of reminds me in this age of politics and, specifically being led by a very um, cult leader with diminishing people who have empathy. I think everyone can realize who I'm talking about, that it really is upsetting that there's so many people, not just who voted for this person, but who actually are rallying themselves around putting down people and feeding into this bullying tactic. Like, how do you recommend those of us who witnessed this and are recognizing that so many are trying to put down those who are empathetic? Like, how do you combat that in such an age where this is now at the highest level of government?
Yeah, this is really dynamic because, to your point, those of us who have empathy, who are, looking out, as I mentioned earlier, for the little guy and are concerned about others and how they'll fare in these environments, um, it's very, very disheartening. It's almost like watching the bad guy win or something, or the bully win. And that's been really horrifying to understand that people would get behind something like this. I think what it's really telling us is that there are a lot more bullies out there. There are a lot more people that subscribe to that and believe wholeheartedly. It's almost like unearthed the toxicity in our culture. But that it's very scary. I see it trending in a dangerous direction. Dr. Ramani talks about this and how we need to cultivate empathy more. We have to make empathy sexy. We have to
Mm.
make it important. We have to prioritize being kind. It reminds me of when I was younger watching Sesame Street, kind of like, be good and share and all. Like, we're not really there anymore. I don't know where we lost it, but um I sometimes see it as uh kind of almost it's going to be hard to turn this ship around, quite honestly. I mean, I don't even know what it's going to take for people to be inspired by empathy. The bottom line is without empathy, we don't exist as a species. If the baby cries and you're the caregiver and you don't give a shit, the baby dies, and then that's how that goes. So we need empathy to exist. I don't know what it's going to take for us to realize that. We're not kind to the earth, we're not kind to each other, and we live in a highly capitalistic, individualistic society. So I don't know, exactly how that's going to come to be. Maybe it'll be in the 11th hour when we realize we've destroyed everything that like we need to fix it. I'm not sure. It's a little scary, quite honestly.
Well, and so many political scientists like have warned that capitalism, like late stage capitalism, which we're in, like trending in this very self-centered manifestation has an expiration date. And I feel like we're living through that right now. And, how much is that connected? Like our government connected to, say, even cult thinking? Like, is there any similarities between what we're observing right now and, say, a Reverend Jim Jones bringing all his community to, you know, a specific isolated area to like just try and believe whatever he's selling them?
Absolutely. That's what my book is about. The book is designed to fuse the concepts of narcissistic abuse and cult abuse. And you can be in a cult of one, which is an intimate relationship with a partner. You can be in a cult of five, which is a cultic family system. You
Mm.
can be in a cult like the Jim Jones cult of hundreds, or you can be in a cult of millions that we're seeing in political climates. Absolutely. People are doubling down just like they might in a cult that's smaller. There's almost nothing the cult leader can do that you would actually turn on them. They are full on in till the end on this, and there's almost no seducing them out of it. It's really scary to watch. But yeah, absolutely. We saw this with Nazi Germany where they would just kind of follow blindly until the end. And that's kind of what I feel like goes on in a lot of political systems, quite honestly.
Have you heard me gush and obsess over one of my favorite magazines? It's called The Gay and Lesbian Review, a bi-monthly magazine of history, culture, and politics. Yes, focusing on all things LGBTQ arts and culture. So, from reviews like the new Daniel Craig film called Queer to musicals, theater, TV shows, the new January, February issue just was mailed to my house. Yes, I still get a physical copy of the magazine. There is a discussion about sodomy at the court of Louis the 14th, how Mark Twain was bottom shamed. Yeah, I know. A scandalous title. I'm really curious what that means. And just so many conversations that will have you doing a Google search to find either the book that's being reviewed, the TV show that's being talked about, the film that's being discussed. I love the Gay and Lesbian Review. And they gave us an exclusive code. So, all you ITBR listeners, make sure that you write down the code ITBR50. Go to glreview.org and you can get either the digital or print subscription for 50% off. Yes, 50% off. Use that code ITBR50. I hope you enjoy your reading. So you all know that I am such a fan of musical theater, and classic movies. So I can't wait for you all to listen to one of my good friends' podcasts. It's called That Old Gay Classic Cinema, hosted by Christian Garcia. It's a podcast that looks at classic cinema films that we know and love. And he was inspired by Turner Classic Movies and The Great Movie Ride. Remember that amazing ride where the Wicked Witch of the West rose up in a burst of flame in Disney? That was one of my favorite rides. I'm so sad it closed. So, while looking at classic films, Christian is so excited to look at it with a queer lens. And he brings on friends like myself to talk about all of these films. I was on the first episode when we discussed The Sound of Music. I've been on an episode of Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo. He just released an episode about the Philadelphia story. He's done Meet Me in St. Louis, Sweet Charity, Psycho, Mary Poppins, Hello Dolly. He had on Down the Yellow Brick Road hosts and the Garland Gab hosts to talk about The Wizard of Oz. So make sure that you listen to That Old Gay Classic Cinema on Apple and Spotify and follow him on TikTok and Instagram at That Old Gay Classic Cinema. Okay, start watching the classic movies and make sure you listen to Christian's podcasts. Well, and like, how about those who might recognize that, say take Trump for existence. Um, he like I've heard this a lot with people even you know, close to in different relationships. Um, well, I don't agree with the way he words things, but he's going to make our economy better. Don't worry, Andrew. He's going to make America just so exciting for you to live in. Just you wait and see. And it's almost that, like, no, no, no. All the predictions or all the things that he's actually said or Project 2025 isn't like I've heard so many times when I've brought that up. Oh, he'll never actually enact any of that. He doesn't agree with it. Like,
Yeah.
so it seems like they realize that there's an issue, but they're still going to, go sinking with the Titanic.
Yeah.
Is
I think they're being gaslit because he denies being part of 2025. Um, but depending upon who he's grifting to in any given moment, he will change his story. We've seen him do this a million times. So, being a native New Yorker who was pro-abortion and a Democrat, now all of a sudden he's figured out that in order for him to get propped up, he will sell this other bag of goods. So he knows how to shapeshift. And unfortunately, the people behind him, a good amount are not savvy, a good amount are uneducated, period. That's the data. And the others, I think, are eager to ride some kind of a delusional gravy train that they imagine. Unfortunately, Donald Trump is not your daddy or granddaddy's Republican. He does not care about his rich friends. He doesn't care about anybody but himself. This is very different than the Reagans and the Bushes you know, of the old days. It's because he is in my opinion, very sociopathic because he likes to create chaos for sport. It's how he feels anything. He feels power. Another good indication, clinically in terms of assessing is that he has no dog. Most presidents have a dog. I think there are only three ever. And the reason why that's easy enough is because they have handlers. So they can do this even just in terms of the optics. He makes that decision because I think he thinks dogs are inferior. He says it sometimes like, I'm gonna treat you like a dog. You're like this, like a dog. So a lot
Mm,
of red flags with him. But the reason I say all of that is because it is a bit of a case study around narcissistic abuse and cult abuse. He's sort of this glaring, obvious, very, very obvious version of this because he gaslights, he lies and then shifts his stories. Um, and yeah, for people who are in the know, it's hard to watch.
mm. Well, so I know you talk a lot about like there's different, I don't know if forms of narcissism is the right clinical term, but there's different almost branches. Like you can have, like there's healthy even versions of narcissistic tendencies. Like, can you explain, because I'm sure anytime you do a conversation, Vanessa, people are always trying to self-diagnose themselves. I'm not
Sure.
sure, like, how many times has that happened where, like, when you talk about the work you do, people are like, well, do you think I'm a narcissist, Vanessa?
I only ever had that happen one time, and it was funny. He's like, all my children call me that. I was like, oh, okay. I don't know. I mean, we'd have to do that in a private session, my friend. Um, but I think, there's a difference between having, let's say, a narcissistic day, right? So let's say I need a Snickers bar or I'm PMSing or something like this, and I'm just being a bitch. The technical and clinical term for being a bitch or being an asshole could be I'm acting narcissistically, right? So my ego or my id is like at front and center, and everyone else be damned. I'm just in a shit mood, so I'm going to now act narcissistically. That is not the same as having a pervasive personality disorder, which means that is your personality. It's always that. So it's almost like the reverse, right? So if you're like a neurotypical person flitting about the earth, you might could have a narcissistic moment. Conversely, somebody who has NPD is flitting about the earth with this angst and then, pretending to be everything and then kind of like, slips out. But everybody can sort of be a shit from time to time. It's actually very Freudian when we start out as kids and then we're very ego driven, mine, and we're biting and we're little jerks. And then civilization and also empathy, should it show up, tells us, okay, I don't like how that feels, so I'm not going to do that to other people. Um, the narcissist is sort of this walking id, kind of, prancing about entitled and almost like a giant toddler.
Hmm.
But they never really get to have those sort of pro-social exchanges. And there's a huge problem that ends up developing for the people around them, unfortunately, and they are sort of everywhere. And very hard to detect too. It's not like they have a sign. It's like, how do you, manage that? It's very challenging.
So you're saying like me being an only child and a Virgo, like my peculiarities aren't necessarily diagnosable, but
Yeah,
in all
that's right.
seriousness, I feel like something you bring up too is how I was fascinated with your discussion about like when you provide constructive criticism to people and they the way that people react, right? I don't think anyone really wants to be criticized, but the approach that, there's a lot of great, we all need healthy criticism, in my opinion. And like the way that you go about that and your intent is important. But what is it about those with MPD when it comes to you calling them out or you critiquing them? Like, how do they handle
Oh,
that?
ooh, not good, not well. Somebody who has actual NPD more than likely would, consider this an injury of sorts. And then, if not lash out directly right away, would take that information, tuck it somewhere, and then search for ways to retaliate, especially if they are particularly malignant and sadistic
Hmm.
and Machiavellian. They would even sometimes take that information and harbor it for years, and then unleash something to kind of punish for you, even giving them the slightest of injuries. Sometimes, if they are really gathering information for a long period of time, this can sort of, be floating underneath and then really come out in the scariest of ways. But yeah, they don't do well with criticism, mostly because they are not um, insightful. And that, as I mentioned earlier, that delusion, that storyline that they're subscribing to, if you try to fracture that, you will be punished. You cannot ever, kind of give them any reality. We see this all the time, actually, where narcissists in abusive relationships will um, not be there when people have a diagnosis of, let's say, cancer or somebody dies. They don't show up for them. They don't know how to do that. But even will take those opportunities to hurt their partner. discard their partner who's been recently diagnosed with cancer. This is because like you're not like being sick to them, anything reality, like even if it's the dentist sometimes, like anything that fractures that reality, I mean that fantasy, that any reality shows up, like a sprained ankle, it's like, what do you mean? Like, this isn't part of my fucking like crazy picture of like how I'm living in this fantasy world. How dare you not be fantastical? How dare you have a cold? You don't have a cold. Like, what are you, some kind of freak? This idea is like that's how they think. It's like you can't fracture their storyline. So anytime reality shows up, they are uncomfortable.
Mm, mm,
So, any kind of re sort of realistic feedback that there's no, this isn't for them.
yeah. Well, are there any similarities or like have you seen research in your experience? Because it seems like highly anxious people and those with NPD, there is a relationship. Like maybe not with the people who are highly anxious having those um, same behaviors or mannerisms, but I've just seen in my own experience, being someone who has anxiety once in a while, that there are NPD not minded, but those who have NPD or those who even have narcissistic tendencies, I feel like they latch on to people who will constantly want to care about them or like they feel like they can feed off of even like highly empathetic people. Like, why is that in your opinion, Vanessa?
Well, they will take attention from anybody. So, does it
Mm,
have a pulse? Is pretty much their gauge. They are eager for constant attention and supply, even sometimes if it's negative. If you are yelling at a narcissist, they could even become sexually aroused by that because you are giving them attention. So I think, they just need that constant feed. I don't think they feel much of anything, and that's why they are eager for that dopamine kick, and that's why they're often addicted to drugs, alcohol, pornography, gambling, food,
mm,
etc. It's almost like they need that constant feeding, they're constantly looking for that dopamine kick. They don't really do well at baseline, mostly because their baseline, I believe, is a little bit lower.
mm,
They don't feel good about themselves. There's like a hole in the bucket. Um, if they weren't so shitty, you'd feel bad for them, quite honestly.
mm. So I'm assuming you're probably not going to see a lot of those who have MPD being okay, just like cozying up with a book and like having a quiet evening. Okay.
Yeah, to your point, they generally do have a high level of anxiety. Psychopaths and sociopaths are a little less anxious. They kind of don't care what you think. And obviously, there's always spectrums of everything and often overlaps between all of them. But the narcissist is anxious. They are concerned with optics. They are concerned about aesthetics and the way they are portrayed and narratives that they are eager to spin. Sociopaths and psychopaths, less so. They are not as anxious. And again, often overlaps. So it's hard to say if somebody's not a psychopath or not a narcissist. But yeah, anxiety seems to be relegated to the narcissist.
Interesting. Okay, so I know that there are professions where those who have, and a lot of like my information comes from you. And also, um, I know you were on her podcast. She had like a podcast dedicated to NPD. Like, I'm trying to figure out her name, Vanessa, but
Dr. Ramani?
yes, thank you. I was going to say she was also on Mel Robbins' podcast,
Yeah.
but an incredible listen. What types of professions do those with levels of narcissism really thrive at? Because it seems like they are applauded in certain arenas in life.
Yeah, I think 1 out of 4 CEOs is a psychopath directly. That's the
Wow.
data. They tend to climb the corporate ladders very readily because they don't have empathy. So they sort of stomp on everybody to get ahead and will lie and portray themselves. Um, as being something they're not. I think Jeffrey Epstein's resume said a bunch of horseshit that he never ever did. No, none of these academic institutions, stuff like this. So they kind of grift their way through and inflate and sort of um, confabulate and make up these stories and get ahead really well. And they tend to be superficially charming.
Mm,
So we see a lot of CEOs, we see a lot of surgeons, we see a ton of police officers. And we also see in the military, the domestic violence instances reported in the military is like, exponentially higher than the normal,
mm,
civilization or, populace. But those are a couple of the, you know, ways that we see it. Lots of politicians, sort of kissing babies and stabbing you in the back, kind of a thing, kind of able to put on a face. Um, we see, poets, priests, and politicians. Yeah, priests. I mean, you see a lot of people who are in religious environments, gurus, things like this.
mm.
Um, so that's why it's so important to understand, I think, that the monster the monsters around you do not look like what you think a monster will look like. They look like your, neighbor Joe, and they look like they just are all around you all the time. And I think that's what makes it so treacherous. But I think we need to really unhand this idea that like somebody who's abusive has like a certain vibe or a way that they might, look.
Yeah. So like if someone just cuts you off in a parking lot, that doesn't mean that they have MPD.
No,
Like that could
not
just
at
mean
all.
that they were an asshole.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Because you're right. I feel like a lot of people listening, or even like my assumption before I started really getting to know your work, Vanessa, is it's like, oh, someone with NPD, like they're going to be really loud in public, or they're going to like be the person who's extremely blunt and calls you out. And it's like, no, that's not, it seems like they're really able to almost in a way, they're excellent actors.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I often think about Hollywood being filled with them, but um because they're able to sort of like cut the film and just portray themselves as something else. It's like they've been reading people for so long they know how to behave as if they know how to portray themselves as if.
As an English professor, I would have no idea where to begin with books to assign to my students. So I absolutely love Broadview Press, who is celebrating their 40th anniversary. Broadview Press, they publish classic works of literature, academic, humanities books. I've read so many of their books, and I've always loved whatever conversations being discussed, from the philosophy of sport, indigenous philosophy and Native American culture, vampire literature, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, new edition that just came out just in time for Wicked fandom, folk and fairy tales. My students love the different Cinderella and Little Red Riding Hood fairy tales that we discussed. They always have a really exciting collection. So head on over right now to broadviewpress.com. Use the exclusive code that they gave us, Ivory Tower, for 20% off all of your orders. I hope you enjoy your reading, and please let me know and DM me with the books that you're getting from Broadview Press, because I'd love to share it with Dylan from Broadview Press, who always is curious to see what the Ivory Tower Boiler Room community is purchasing. So enjoy your reading, and I hope you discover even more exciting humanities works. So, as we're nearing the end of our time, which has just been fascinating, Vanessa, like what are some, you know, tips that you have, even in your book, that, you recommend for someone who either thinks that they're in direct contact with someone who has MPD, or even, if they themselves feel like um, they're living a life where they might even just need to seek therapy because not that they're necessarily going to be diagnosed with MPD, but they think that there's like narcissistic tendencies that are starting to overwhelm them in their life.
Mhm. If you are around somebody who you think may have NPD or is being abusive, generally this consensus is to get away from them. We don't have any data really that suggests that they change. And you would measure the change in millimeters versus miles. Dr. Ramani refers to this as the rubber band theory. So sometimes they can portray themselves as being something and then they kind of revert back to who they really are. Um, this idea that you're going to be able to set boundaries with narcissists is just not accurate. They see boundaries. If you tell them boundaries, all you're really telling them is what to exploit. You're giving them intel, and so that's why the no contact concept is so important. Um, and, there's a ton of cognitive dissonance or competing thoughts of sort of Jekyll and Hyde when you're around them. And so it's almost impossible to not become confused, particularly if you're co-parenting with one, because, how do you ever, sort of have this real strong understanding of the person that you're gifting this child to? This precious child is like an abusive person. You can't. So you have to have cognitive dissonance almost by design. Otherwise, you would take your kid and, fly off to Colombia. If, you have to manage this idea of the risk as being so high in terms of psychological abuse, etc. But generally, and I honor people can't leave for financial reasons, cultural reasons, familial reasons, etc. Generally, the idea is that, you know, 2 years is going to be coming with or without you. That time frame will pass, and it's better to have healed and managed the post separation abuse and gotten out of it than to not, because it's like I think every client that comes to me and says like, I was going to leave 5 years ago, I wish I did.
Mm.
I mean, it's like almost like the ghost of Christmas future. It's like they're telling you like get out now, but because you're wasting something that's so precious, which is this commodity of time. How can you ever replace that? And so really the idea is to just get away from them and find a tribe that's safe and do the healing. And get with people that can collaborate.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you is how has it been like being witness or part of so many support groups? Like I'm assuming, when even like myself, I've cut off just toxic people in my life, and they will sometimes try to reach out, and I ignore it. And in the past, I try to like I felt very guilty ignoring it. But then reading your work, Vanessa, I'm like, no, what would Vanessa suggest? And I say to myself, don't even communicate because there's nothing that's going to, if they're not offering an apology and they're not recognizing why I stopped talking to them in the first place, then there has been no repairing. So,
Yeah.
isn't it better to be in a support group, like even with my friends, those of us who treat each other with respect, listen to each other, even when we have criticism, we hear each other and, respond. So, like, how is that like a way that we can all protect ourselves, specifically in such a polarized time in
Yeah.
politics?
I love what you just said. And I feel like I've been very active in New Jersey because I just moved here a few years, 2 years ago, 3 years ago now. And I've been trying to curate. I have a gaggle of really good friends. They tend to be peppered around the country though, and even internationally. And I'm trying to curate like a new cast of characters that is regional because of the political environment being what it is. And it's kind of a cool, fun new experience. I was very active in the community in New York and ultimately just moved away from those environments. I was a founder of the Pride Center in Nyack and others. But now I'm in this region. I'm eager to find people that I feel really safe with, that I feel comfortable with, that are like-minded, so I can kind of lock arms and have those brilliant conversations with around a fire pit with some red wine. Those are really the things I want to do and just snuggle my dog. I don't really care about much else. And I think we're probably going to see that start to happen, little pods of people that feel safe with one another. And I would encourage everyone listening to do something like that. I think that's really the important thing. Because if you're seeing bullying, if you're seeing toxicity on your television in terms of the political environment, it's not healthy. I don't think I think a lot of people are going to be doing exactly what you just said.
Yeah, it's almost like, in a way, I was saying to my boyfriend, like we're kind of saying we're not that we're going off the grid of technology, because right, we all rely on it, but it's like being so much more conscious of, you know what? In the early 2000s or the 90s, wasn't it nice to just have a book and not worry
Mm.
about a cell phone? Like, I agree with you. I feel like we're kind of cutting away from that 24-hour news cycle, or the more sensational, the better. And in a way, right, we're speaking with our voice and we're also speaking as viewers. And if the viewers aren't there, those programs don't exist. So
Yeah,
it's
I think a
almost a
lot of
wake up
us,
call. Yeah.
right. And I think a lot of us were so eager to be involved because we were trying to save the world. Now it's like, okay, let them figure out on their own what they just did. Unfortunately, it's almost like Jonestown and any other cult. It's like, okay, they're going to have to drink the Kool-Aid and they're going to have to, deal with, we tried to warn, we did the best that we could. And now it's somewhat liberating because there's nothing else you can really do other than just, as you mentioned, just find your tribe members and just have a good time.
It's true. It's true. Well, is there anything, I guess my last question before, right, you offer how to contact all the contact information and how everyone can follow you and get their hands on your book is, since, TV and film is such a part of our lives, is there any TV show or film that you feel like does a very good job of exploring MPD?
I would say The Vow on HBO Max, which is the story of the Nexium cult, feels extremely relevant because you'll be witnessing Keith Raniere, who is the cult leader, be rather unassuming. So this is not somebody who looks like a monster. It also takes place in New York because I think people think cults happen in some faraway land. And there were male victims, there were female victims, and it also ended in 2021. So it's very recent. And I like that for people so they can really understand what it looks like to deal with a cult leading narcissist, which, it sort of happens in these intimate relationships, but also it's important to see what they look like and what the characteristics are.
Thank you, Vanessa. So, how can everyone out there connect to you, follow you? Where's Vanessa Reiser out there in the media
Sure.
world?
Sure. So, my book, Narcissistic Abuse, A Therapist's Guide to Identifying, Escaping, and Healing from Toxic and Manipulative People, is available at hachetteBookGroup.com and also Amazon. If you read it and you like it, leave an Amazon review. It means a lot to me. You can also find me at Vanessa Reiser, LCSW on Instagram, or tellatherapist.net, which is my website if you are looking for psychotherapy services.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, Vanessa. And, I'm thankful to know you and continue to just be educated by you. So, this means a lot to have you on.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Okay. Well, bye to everyone out there. And I hope, I'm sure you learned a lot, maybe things you didn't even know, or maybe it just, you now know you have to get Vanessa's book or continue listening to this type of research. So please share the word. Um, please, send this to anyone you think would benefit from it, and make sure, follow Vanessa because she's always posting excellent research and information on her Instagram page. Okay. Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you.